Hey, how you doing? Can everybody hear me okay? My name is Bonnie Brzozowski. I'm a reference librarian here at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library, and I just want to welcome you to today's random review. This is actually our last random review in our 2023 to 2024 series. We'll take a break and be back in September. Keep an eye out in August for are releasing our new schedule. We are currently working on choosing reviewers for the books that we've already selected for 2024 to 2025, and I can't wait to share those with you. So keep an eye out. If you don't know, me and my coworker, Mike Hansen, we're the co-chairs of the Random Review Committee. The committee, we're a group of 9 folks. We come together once a year to select books and reviewers for this 10-month series. So I just want to say thanks so much to the committee and to the Friends of the Library who make Random Review possible. And I want to give a special thanks to Gary Whitehouse for writing our fabulous press releases. If you're not familiar, I want to mention our Random Review webpage. You can find it from the library's homepage. There's a link to it. And on that page, you'll find the Random Review schedule of events. So when we announce the next season, you'll see it there. You'll also see a list of books related to each book review that's compiled by our volunteer, Gail Gerdeman. Some of those books are in the back there. So be sure to take a look and feel free to take what you like and get those checked out. And on that page, you'll also find links to audio recordings of each of these in-person events. And the audio recordings also are posted along with transcripts to the library's YouTube channel. So take a look there if you want to listen. I also just want to thank our Friends of the Library group specifically for their co-sponsorship and support of Random Review. If you haven't heard, they not only founded and ran the Random Review series for 30 years, they also coordinate and run book sales whose funds benefit the library, and they also support the library in many other ways. You can learn more about them, how to join, as well as how to volunteer for them at their website, friendsofthecbclibrary.org. They do so much for us, so we really appreciate them. Okay, thanks for listening to me on that. Let's get to our main event today. Today, we've invited Susan Jackson Rogers to review Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. If you're not familiar with Susan, she's the author of the novel This Must Be the Place, as well as 2 story collections, The Trouble with You Is, and Ex-Boyfriend on Aisle 6. I actually have those back in the back if you want to check one out. Her stories and essays have appeared in journals such as New England Review, Colorado Review, North American Review, River Teeth, and Brevity. Susan's originally from Connecticut and New York City. She and her husband moved to Corvallis from Manhattan, Kansas, with their 3 then school-age children in 2008. She is currently a professor of creative writing and literature at Oregon State University and has served as Associate Dean of the OSU Honors College since 2020. So I'd like to welcome Susan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bonnie. Can everybody hear me okay with this mic? Great, okay. And thanks to the Friends of the Library for inviting me and for sponsoring this terrific series. You've organized so many great talks about a variety of books this year. I've also really enjoyed listening to those past random reviews that Bonnie was mentioning online, so you should all check out those archives. They're really terrific. And of course, many thanks to all of you for coming. It's a beautiful day outside. You are crazy to be here, but it is great to see you, so thank you. I was a little apprehensive when Tiffany from Grassroots Bookstore approached me about random reviewing Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead. While I have read several of her early books, Kingsolver's recent works are sprawling, heavily plotted social problem novels, books that overtly take on a big idea or theme or question. Even as I recognize and admire Kingsolver's exceptional talent in this genre, my personal taste is for smaller, more intimate stories. The reception of this book in the press has been mostly very positive. If you read the reviews of readers online, it's a novel that people either absolutely love or can't quite get through, or else they hit a slump in the middle, as I did, then push on till the end and are glad that they finished it. A recent New Yorker Shouts and Murmurs titled Signs You Should Give Up on a Book includes such signs as you're 20 minutes into reading the book and just now realize you've been asleep the whole time. You stay up all night tearing through the pages of the book, only you're not reading the actual words. You're just looking for the page in which you tucked a piece of scrap paper with your Gmail password on it. And then this, you are reading David Copperfield before starting on Demon Copperhead, which was inspired by David Copperfield, because you think this will give you a feeling of accomplishment that will make you feel better about how you've been cold emailing recruiters on LinkedIn for the past year without getting any responses, probably because your only viable skill is reading books you can't seem to finish. Demon Copperhead, the most recent of Kingsolver's 17 books, has received many accolades. Here are some of the awards she's gotten. It was named an Oprah Book Club selection immediately upon publication, and in 2023 was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. The Pulitzer, you might remember, last year was given to two writers, to Kingsolver and also to Hernan Diaz for his novel Trust. Demon Copperhead also received Britain's prestigious Women's Prize for Fiction, formerly known as the Orange Prize, making Kingsolver the first author in the history of the prize to receive the award twice. She also received it in 2010 for The Lacuna. So how many of you have read Demon Copperhead? What's the show of hands? So, oh, quite a few. Excellent. Great. Okay. So let's play a little Barbara bingo. I don't know how well you can see this. These are her 17 titles. I'll go first. I've read The Bean Trees, Animal Dreams, Pigs in Heaven, and The Poisonwood Bible. So how many of you have read 3 or more Kingsolver books? Great. How many have read 6 or more? Okay, any Kingsolver completists? Has anyone read all of her books? 10 or more, almost? Okay, well, quite a few. You're better experts than I am probably with her work. I've read those early books, but not a lot of the more recent. So if you're a Kingsolver fan, I do heartily recommend visiting her website where she's provided her autobiography. I wanted to give you just a few interesting tidbits. She went to DePauw on a piano scholarship, actually, and supported herself as an art class model, a typist, a house cleaner, and a typesetter. After graduation, she bought a one-way ticket to Europe. She wanted to see the world, and she worked various jobs, but especially she worked on a lot of archaeological digs in France and England. In 1978, she moved to Tucson, Arizona, curious to see the West. She worked as a lab tech, then started grad school at the U of Arizona in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. She took a job as a scientific writer, and at this point, she also started writing for newspapers and magazines. She kind of branched out into arts coverage and investigative journalism, and she took this huge leap and decided to become a full-time freelancer. Her first year, she earned a whopping $6,000, and she learned to live on that, she says. She was covering a mining strike, and she assembled interviews into a book that she tried to sell to an agent. She went down to her local library, found some agents, looked them up, sent it to the agent, but that agent had no luck in placing that. And at this point, she was also publishing short fiction and poems, and in the meantime had gotten married to her first husband and was pregnant with her first child. Her pregnancy insomnia led her to write The Bean Trees. So while she was up at night, she wrote The Bean Trees, just on the side. Right before having her baby, she makes it sound almost like she was on the way to the delivery room when she did this, but maybe it wasn't quite so direct. She went into this cleaning frenzy and she said, should I throw out the manuscript? Should I send it to the agent? Throw it out, send it? So she sent it to the agent, said, I don't even know if this is a novel. And the agent said, oh yes, it's a novel, sold it. And of course that book is still in print. After 20 years in Arizona, she moved back to Appalachia and lives on a farm where she has an extensive vegetable garden and raises sheep. So again, much more to her story, but I love those tidbits of her early career. And then here are some selected awards and honors. So Demon Copperhead, 500 pages, not easy to summarize. I'll give it a go. I see the novel as having 3 main parts. First, Demon's early childhood. He loses his mother to an overdose and deals with increasingly unstable living situations. There's the foster placement at Creaky Farm, where he and 3 other boys are forced to work the tobacco fields. And later, he's placed with an abusive foster family. In the second part, Demon is in middle and high school. He lives with a football coach and his daughter, Angus. Life for Demon is pretty good in this section. He has a more or less stable home environment. And because he's big for his age, coach puts him on the football team. He becomes something of a star athlete before getting injured, which leads to the third part of the story: painkillers, addiction, his relationship with his girlfriend, Dory, and finally, a series of tragedies, which I won't reveal for those who haven't yet read the book. I figured I should prepare for Demon Copperhead by first reading David Copperfield, another doorstopper at over 800 pages. I love this illustration of David and his Aunt Betsy and the donkeys. If you've read David Copperfield, you'll remember the donkeys. This was Dickens' favorite of his books. He first tried writing his autobiography, but found it too painful. And so he fictionalized the story and published it in 20 installments between 1849 and 1850. David Copperfield is a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story, the story of a young man's moral and artistic development, and as I'll discuss, the effects on the reader are quite different from Demon Copperhead. It's been a while since I've read a Dickens novel, and I'd forgotten about the pleasures of his work: memorable characters, evocative setting details, humor, social commentary, a lively plot with the ending of almost every chapter pushing the reader to go on to the next, that serialization trick that he is so good at. I remembered his characters as cartoonish, but that's not really true. While there are some flat characters, most are complex and layered. Or maybe it's just that his brilliance is to take a one-dimensional character and develop that one dimension in a dozen different ways. Kingsolver arrived at the idea of using David Copperfield as her template quite by accident. She wanted to write a novel about her native Appalachia and the opioid crisis, but she spent 2 years, she says, looking for my way in. In the podcast Pulitzer on the Road, she says, I found it in the most surprising way in Charles Dickens' house. She says, my husband and I had a weekend to kill after UK book tour and saw online that you could spend the night in Bleak House where Charles Dickens had lived. He didn't actually live there. It was an inn where he stayed and did some of his work. And in his little study at the end of the hall, which you can see in that picture on the right, that fisheye lens picture, which was full of Dickens stuff, I found the profound, angry spirit of Charles Dickens. I sat in that room thinking about this man who had made a whole career out of his outrage at the way these children, these products of institutional poverty, were thrown away by his society. And I felt like he was talking to me. He said, you think you can't write about orphans and poverty? He said, let the kid tell the story. I felt he was giving me permission. She goes back to bed and says to her husband, I've just had a conversation with Charles Dickens. He's married to a writer, so of course he doesn't miss a beat, just asks how'd it go. Obviously it went well. She wrote all that night, Demon's voice coming to her loud and clear and angry. In fact, much later, once she'd written a full draft, she had to tone him down. She removed dozens of F words from the manuscript. Before they left the UK, she downloaded David Copperfield on her tablet and read it on the flight home. She could see chapter by chapter how it might work. Back in her study, and this to me is so wild, she opened a spreadsheet and created 64 cells for the 64 chapters in David Copperfield. And in each cell, she wrote a short sketch of what happened in that chapter. And then she started filling in the cells underneath with what would happen in her version. Figuring all this out was like solving 64 puzzles, she says. What's the modern Appalachian version of a bootblack factory? Sorting garbage behind the Circle K, which is also a meth lab. Bit by bit, I went through it. What would be the boarding school for boys whose parents have little means? Well, that would be Creaky Farm, a foster care home run by this man who's using these boys for free labor. She adds, I didn't do it all in order. Sometimes I would have an idea of what would happen in chapter 50 or chapter 14. I filled in the outlines of the plot and saw I could do it. But I needed that propulsive voice of Demon to carry the reader through. For 3 years, I wrote with David Copperfield open at my elbow, studying the tricks of this great, great writer. And it was really fun to take that novel apart and see the puppeteer behind all the puppets. Dickens, she says, had written her first draft for her. Such direct transposing is risky. In the Telegraph in 2022, so before the interview that she did with where she talked about all those crazy spreadsheets, Jessa Crispin saw through this process, referring to various plot points in Demon Copperhead as ticking boxes and changing names and circumstances ever so slightly, so that it begins to feel as if Kingsolver pasted the text of David Copperfield and worked mostly through the find and replace function. One other aspect of Kingsolver's process that I find fascinating, I think many creative writing teachers, when we talk about writing literary fiction, that is character-based fiction that aspires to be art, that strives for meaning and beauty, as this novel does, recommend that students begin with a character or perhaps with an image. Not to suggest that there's only one way to write a story or novel. Each writer, and in fact, each work will find its own way, and there are no hard and fast rules in this game. But generally speaking, we talk about how character is at the center of what we're doing. And if we create complex characters in a particular moment or situation, or follow an image or a first line, then the plot will grow organically out of that. And from there, we begin to discover what it is we mean, what our thematic concerns are, maybe in the 3rd or 12th draft. We're even heard to claim that we don't really know what we mean until we've written the whole thing. Revision involves going back into the draft and figuring out how to amplify those themes that we've identified through the process. But Kingsolver starts her novels with what she wants to say. She begins with an issue, a social problem. She wants to write about ecology or rural poverty. As a former journalist, she says that newspaper accounts can only convey so much. A story provides the direct learning the reader needs to truly get it. So she takes the message she wants to impart and creates a plot around that message. And then she says she plugs in a character to enact the plot, creating the character who would best perform the actions the story requires to properly deliver the book's message. Her approach is one that I'm sure many writers share, and certainly her success attests to its effectiveness, but made me understand why her books are sometimes criticized as too didactic, because in fact they are didactic, intended to teach. As one reviewer writes, some of the flaws in her approach apply to Demon Copperhead, the notes of sanctimony, the occasional compulsion to lecture. But the voice of Demon, the novel's puckish narrator, is so original and the plot so engrossingly hectic that there's less room for that Kingsolver didacticism to intrude. I wish, for the sake of this talk, that I could live in parallel universes. One in which I read David Copperfield before Demon Copperhead, and one in which I did not. It's tough to keep the details separate. In fact, initially, I found it impossible. I closed Dickens' novel, dusted myself off, picked up Kingsolver's, read the first 2 pages, and oh my goodness. Every single Dickens character has a corresponding Appalachian version, but with the occasional nuanced differences in the character's role or relationship to the protagonist made my head spin. So Betsy Trotwood is David's father's aunt, so David's great aunt. But Betsy Woodall is Demon's father's mother, so Demon's paternal grandmother. Clara Peggotty is David's mother's beloved servant who provides David with much comfort and support throughout his life. Nance Peggot is a caring neighbor and the grandmother of Demon's good friend, Maddie Peggot, AKA Maggot. This is a picture of me after I started reading the You can compare also the 2 openings. So opening sentences, David Copperfield. You'll recognize this even if you haven't read the book. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. To begin my life, at the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I have been informed and believe, on a Friday at 12 o'clock at night. Demon Copperhead. First, I got myself born. A decent crowd was on hand to watch, and they've always given me that much. The worst of the job was up to me, my mother being, let's just say, out of it. Some reviewers say that the great pleasure of this book is tracing what Kingsolver does with her source material. But if you're going to read Dickens first, I suggest you take a gap year. I needed a literary palate cleanser, so I read Sigrid Nunez's The Vulnerables, lovely novel, by the way, before going back to Kingsolver. And even then, it was difficult not to compare the 2 works, character by character, scene by scene, event by event. And let's face it, no matter how good you are at the social problem novel, no one does a Charles Dickens social problem novel like Charles Dickens. Some of the transferred plot works well. David and Demon both lose their mothers and suffer at the hands of cruel stepfathers, experience hunger and deprivation in orphanages or their equivalent, and endure wretched labor conditions as children. The transposition of other plot points and characters felt strained. Uriah Heep, here U-Haul, and the Macabres, are poorly integrated into her scheme, one reviewer comments. Dickens' Macabres are feckless but mean well. Kingsolver's Macabres are merely exploitative. I really missed the weirdly sinuous Uriah and even more the well-meaning Macabres and the mutual affection between them and David. The Macabres are just plain evil. They only take Demon in for the foster care money. They make him sleep in a dog bed in the laundry room. They starve him. They spy on him. We might describe these details as Dickensian, except they're so much worse. Zero redeeming moments for those people. Adaptations and retellings are nothing new, of course. They are a rich literary tradition unto themselves. We like to imagine that writers are these brilliant artists who go off into their writing studios and dream up completely original stories. But there are no original stories. Even Shakespeare, whom we think of as the original, used Holinshed's Chronicles, for example, to write King Lear, Macbeth, and other plays. Retellings seem especially popular in the last few years. Two other novels long listed for the Women's Prize alongside Demon Copperhead were retellings of older stories. Maggie O'Farrell's The Marriage Portrait and Natalie Haynes' Stone Blind. And in 2019, that prize was given to The Silence of the Girls, also a retelling. Books always speak of other books, and every story tells a story that has already been told. My favorite adaptation is Michael Cunningham's The Hours, though I'm not a fan of the film adaptation of the adaptation, which in his book plays with Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway in inventive ways, less a point-by-point retelling and more of a tribute to the original and to the author. Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres is a book I read 1,000 years ago. I was living in the Midwest at the time, and I remember admiring the way she transposed King Lear to an Iowa farm. Jane Austen is a favorite source for retellings. There are over a dozen adaptations of Pride and Prejudice alone, like Curtis Sittenfeld's Eligible. And of course, who can forget the movie Clueless, which puts Austen's Emma in a Beverly Hills high school in the 1980s. Percival Everett's book, James, published in March of this year, tells the story of Jim, the slave in Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. James is garnering terrific reviews. A New York Times reviewer acknowledged that his idea of hell would be to live with a library that contained only reimaginings of famous novels. It's a wet-brained and dutiful genre by and large. Wet-brained I don't really understand, but dutiful, yes. The author is somewhat duty-bound to the plot and intentions of that original author. But James, the reviewer says, is the rarest of exceptions, a tangled and subversive homage. So add that one to your summer reading list, James by Percival Everett. Retellings of other Dickens novels include Michael Rosen's Bah Humbug and Laurie Langdon's Olivia Twist. Anyway, I struggled initially to read Demon Copperhead as its own thing. Even as I was moved by Demon's story, and Kingsolver has many, many astonishing moments here, I missed David. I missed his wide-eyed innocence and guilelessness, his optimism. David Copperfield, writes Rohan Mason, is a story about moral development, about David's character, and especially about his tender, loving heart. What I missed most of all in Demon Copperhead was the melancholy tenderness that suffuses David Copperfield and the way Dickens shades David's highs and lows with his profound understanding of both the necessity and the heartbreak of losing our childhood innocence. There's also a lot of comedy in Dickens. That reviewer who teased Kingsolver about using find and replace to write the novel says, the one thing Kingsolver apparently decided to control X were all the funny bits. Beset by earnestness, Demon Copperhead breaks the most important rule of working in the Dickensian mode. You must show the reader a good time. David Copperfield is funny and tragic, absurd and painful. Demon Copperhead is only sad and glum, with every bad thing that happened in the original cranked up a bit. That might be going too far, but it's true that there are many more laugh out loud moments in Dickens, like the scene of David as a young man who has moved into his own place and invites his friends to dinner. They all drink far too much, and David recalls that somebody was leaning out of my bedroom window, refreshing his forehead against the cool stone of the parapet and feeling the air upon his face. It was myself. I was addressing myself as Copperfield and saying, why did you try to smoke? You might have known you couldn't do it. Now somebody was unsteadily contemplating his features in the looking glass. That was I too. I was very pale in the looking glass. My eyes had a vacant appearance, and my hair, only my hair, nothing else, looked drunk. When David and his friends decide to go out and one of them falls down the stairs, somebody says that it was Copperfield. I was angry at that false report, David says, until finding myself on my back in the passage, I began to think there might be some foundation for it. Of course, there's absolutely nothing amusing in the corresponding scenes of Demon getting high on the prescribed OxyContin that ends up nearly killing him. Here's a passage in which Demon describes the dragon he was chasing. It becomes your job, staving off the dope sickness for another day. Then it becomes your God. Nobody ever wanted to join that church. A bad day is waking up with nothing, no God, no means, lying in your stinking sheets, smelling what you hope is yourself and not your girlfriend. Someone has beat the tar out of you, it seems, and crushed some bones, possibly a person. This comes with the lifestyle, but more likely it was the junk putting its fist through all your personal drywall on its way out of the building. Empty, you are a monster. The person you love is monstrous. You watch her eyes roll back in her head and her pretty legs racking like the epileptic girl we all knew in grade school, Gola Ham. We were terrified of Gola. I mean, that is gorgeous writing. There is humor in Kingsolver's novel. Demon can be very funny, often unintentionally, but she tends to employ it at the sentence, not the scene level. Demon describes a rooster with the mind of a serial killer that gave me bad dreams, or a guy with wrongful eyebrows, or it's dark humor like, I was a lowlife, born in the mobile home, so that's like the Eagle Scout of trailer trash. In a broad wink to the reader, Demon is assigned to read Charles Dickens in high school and refers to him as a seriously old guy, dead and a foreigner. But Christ Jesus, did he get the picture on kids and orphans getting screwed over and nobody given a rat's ass? You'd think he was from around here. Both protagonists are first-person retrospective narrators, that is, narrators who tell the story of their childhoods from an adult perspective. But David tells his story from a much wider distance. He's looking back on his childhood and youth from a comfortable and successful middle or late middle age. He's made it as a writer, he has a family, and he can reflect on his own evolution. In a recent interview, the filmmaker Richard Linklater said, I love this quote, "The most fascinating relationship we all have is to ourselves at different times of our lives." And Dickens' novel is almost an explication of David's relationship to each stage of his childhood and youth. Adult David is not angry or bitter or whiny. He's curious, observant, tender, relieved, remorseful, surprised, joyous. Demon's story is, as several readers have noted, a lot of this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Even Kingsolver's website describes her novel as having a plot that never pauses for breath. There's very little room for reflection or analysis in this chaotic plot. And more to the point, by the end of Kingsolver's novel, Demon is maybe, what would you say, 20 years old? You read it? Yeah, 20 years old. He's still inside that terrible story. In fact, Kingsolver shifts to present tense in the last paragraph of the book. Demon is just barely out of the horrific adolescence that he's looking back on. Maybe another difference is that Charles Dickens had an axe to grind, but David Copperfield did not. Barbara Kingsolver has an axe to grind and sets Demon to grind it for her. She wants to teach us about lost children, the corrupt foster care system, rural poverty, the many ways Appalachia has been ravaged by outside forces, from coal mining companies to Purdue Pharma. Demon is her mouthpiece. In contrast to David, who's an active character, constantly moving and aspiring and working and striving, here's one page of Dickens' chapter titles. I know that's probably too small for you to read, but he's enlarging and beginning and forming resolutions and making discoveries and choosing a profession. Demon is mostly a passive character, a victim of terrible circumstance upon terrible circumstance, an active survivor, to be sure, but one who by necessity embraces a kind of fatalism over volition. All Demon can do in his positions of powerlessness, as a neglected orphan, as a foster care kid, as the victim of adult bullies, as someone living in acute poverty, and finally as a drug addict, is to react, to survive, try to get through another day. When his social worker asks him what he wants to be when he grows up, he says, "Nobody ever asked me that question before about growing up and what I wanted to be, so I didn't know, mainly still alive." A drug addict is a tough character to write because even though addiction requires a lot of effort, scrounging for money to get the substance, procuring the substance, administering the substance, concealing your actions from others so that you can keep doing more substance, addicts in fiction and in life are by definition stuck in the cycle and, understatement, have a hard time getting unstuck. In a novel ostensibly about self-creation, Molly Young writes, Demon's addiction is a narrative impasse. He can't conquer it until he summons the will to change. He can't summon the will to change because he's a severely impaired addict. I wonder if this is why, for me, the middle part of the book, somewhere around page 340 of 548 pages, became somewhat tedious. It wasn't just the harrowing aspect. I mean, yes, watching Demon and his addict girlfriend Dory trying to maintain an existence while also trying to maintain a drug habit was painful. But the closer we get to Demon's current age, the less distance Kingsolver can create between his narration and his past self. I found myself yearning for a third-person narrator in spite of the electric energy of the voice. I just wanted to pull back for one moment. And also, full disclosure, David Copperfield has its share of tedious parts too, or maybe my attention span is just shot. This is one of my favorite things a colleague has ever sent me, making this my new email signature. Sorry for the delay of my reply. I'm simply too old and tired for such things. I lack concentration. It's sad. It is sad. And here's a perspective that I think is important for us to consider at this juncture, whether or not you decide that you agree with it. Novels entertain, and many have also argued that reading novels increases our empathy for others. But one of the problems with social novels intended to heighten our understanding is that in writing about traumas, the writer risks turning suffering into entertainment and stripping the characters of agency. The traumas that Dickens wrote about were some that he had himself experienced. He worked in that bootblack factory as a child. Knowing how his own story ended gave him control over what he felt readers should know and what might move his peers to act on behalf of indigent women and children. Kingsolver dedicates her books to the survivors, those kids, she says in her acknowledgments, who wake up hungry in those dark places every day. She also claims kinship with them, having grown up in the Appalachians, and credits her own mama and papa for the stories they shared with her. But these are not Kingsolver's own experiences. Her dad was a doctor. They traveled widely. She currently has a net worth, if you believe the internet, of $14 million. Demon Copperhead, Barry writes, becomes a form of poverty porn, a slum tour where pity is the price of the ride. Those on display can only stare back. However, we must also honor the reactions of readers like Jessica Miller, an Appalachian who was put in foster care due in part to her father's opioid addiction. I felt vindicated and relieved that the author voiced all the things I want to explain to people who don't understand where I come from. Kingsolver compassionately shows how exploitative industries like logging and coal mining, big box retailers like Walmart, and pharmaceutical companies like Purdue have taken advantage of Appalachia for the sake of profit. I think in the end, for me, this is the value of reading this social problem novel, to understand at a visceral level, from as Dickens' Ghost recommended, the kid telling the story, what it really means when we say that systemic rural poverty is a product of corporate greed. Coal mining companies literally made it impossible for any other industries to move into the region. They owned all the businesses in town, even ran the schools, thereby controlling the education or lack thereof that their workers' children would receive and guaranteeing that the only jobs those kids could get would be in the mines. Under these conditions, there are no proverbial bootstraps to pull yourself up with. And if you're injured in those mines or on the football field, or from working 3 minimum wage jobs and prescribed a medication by your trusted doctor that you are told is 100% safe and non-addictive, only to discover that in fact, it inexorably alters your brain chemistry and you become addicted before your first prescription runs out, violently ill if you don't take more, well, this book brings all those social problems to life through its characters and reminds us that they're but for the grace. If you've read Patrick Radden Keefe's Empire of Pain about the Sackler family, or Beth Macy's Dopesick, or watched any of the documentaries about Purdue Pharma and this horrendous example of greed and inhumanity, and you read Demon Copperhead, prepare to be outraged and heartbroken all over again. Do you know about the non-triplicate states? How many have heard about the non-triplicate states? This is just one of 1,000 horrifying details about Purdue Pharma. You're aware, I'm sure, that Purdue targeted certain states, Virginia, West Virginia, Maine, Kentucky among them. Part of the selection was based on the fact that in these states, triplicate forms for Schedule II substances were not required. With these forms, a physician writing a prescription kept 1 copy and gave the patient 2 copies. The patient took those 2 copies to the pharmacy. The pharmacist would keep one and send the other to the state drug monitoring agency. So Purdue targeted what they called the non-triplicate states, states that did not track or monitor these prescriptions. If non-triplicate states had the same initial level of exposure to OxyContin as triplicate states, they would have 34% fewer drug overdose deaths and 45% fewer opioid overdoses on average each year from 1996 to 2017. Okay, I want to note 3 other important aspects of this book that deserve attention. First, Kingsolver is able to show us the plight of rural Americans who feel either invisible and ignored or mocked and maligned. Here is Demon letting us know how it feels to live in a part of the country that is the butt of all jokes. These people and vegetarians and so forth that are all about being fair to the races and the gays, I am down with that. I agree. But would it cross any mind to be fair to us? No, it would not. How do I know? TV. The Comedy Channel is so funny it can make you want to go unlock the gun cabinet and kill yourself. Do they really think that along with being brainless and having sex with animals, we don't even have cable? This is what I would say if I could to all smart people of the world with their dumb hillbilly jokes. We are right here. We can actually hear you. As someone who was raised and went to college on the East Coast and then spent 25 years in Kansas, I can tell you that the Dorothy jokes and the constant denigrating of the flyover zone and the, oh, how did you live there? It's so flat, all get pretty old. Kingsolver says in an interview, "It is my best hope that this book can help move a conversation between these 2 really different Americans that aren't talking to each other. It's really scary to me that these divides, the divide between urban and rural, has become even more of a gulf in recent years. If this book can help people understand what's wrong with the big middle that they've been calling flyover country, that is populated with real people, with real concerns, if I can help create a conversation that begins from a place of respect rather than from a place of contempt, I will have done something useful." She points out that while she doesn't vote like many of her neighbors, she understands why they are motivated to vote the way they do. A second aspect I want to mention is the pursuit of art as the path towards meaning and fulfillment. David Copperfield, like his progenitor, becomes a famous writer. Dickens was likely the most famous person in UK of his day. As a child, Demon draws comics as a way to process anger and satirize his tormentors. He's also just a boy who loves superheroes. Eventually, he publishes his comics in a local newspaper with the help of his friend Tommy, and later, with the support of a teacher, he creates a graphic novel about Lee County and its inhabitants. It's not going to make him enough money to live on, but he has, as we say, found his voice and maybe a way into a better future. The third thing I wanted to say was that Kingsolver writes beautifully about community in Appalachia. She says that the main thing I could tell you about Appalachia is that we are people made of community. You feel really attached to your family and your people. It explains a lot of the good things and harder things about Appalachia. Like, why is it so hard to go away to college? Because your family knows you might not come back. And that's a legit concern. Even though Americans are not supposed to think that way, we still do. Indulge me one last quote from Demon that I think portrays this aspect of Appalachia beautifully. He's been away from home at this point in the novel, and he says, "Up home, it's different. I mean, yes, you want money and a job, but there's 100 other things you do for getting by. Having some ground to stand on, that's our whole basis. It's the bags of summer squash and Shelly beans everybody gives you from their gardens, and on from there. The porch rockers where the mamas get together and knit baby clothes for the pregnant high school girls, sandwiches the church ladies pack for the hungrier kids to take home on weekends. Honestly, I would call us the juice economy, or I guess used to be, up until everybody started getting wrecked on the newer product. We did not save our juice. We would give it to each and all we meet because we're going to need some of that back before long, along with the free advice and power tools. Covered dishes for a funeral, porch music for a wedding, extra hands for getting the tobacco in. Just talking about it made me homesick. We all want what we're used to." As I've said, positive and negative reviews alike agree that the biggest strength of this novel is Demon's voice, and you can hear it in this lyrical passage. Covered dishes for a funeral, porch music for a wedding, extra hands for getting the tobacco in. The prose rhythm here is just perfection. I'll close with three things briefly that struck me months after I finished this book. First, the experience of being a kid in the system. While there are many wonderful foster parents who are nothing like the monsters in this novel, 500,000 children living in what was intended to be a temporary safety net is too many. Second, the opioid crisis and addiction. Kingsolver has said that everyone she knows someone who has lost someone to a drug overdose, and she makes us feel what this is like. And finally, this portrait of Appalachia, its history, tragedies, and beauty. I look forward to hearing your comments about the book. I'd love to know what you thought of it and having some conversation for the next few minutes. Thank you again for coming today. Comments, questions? Yes.
When I got toward the end, I dreaded turning the page. Because you were just going deeper and deeper. The book I most dreaded turning the page was The Road.
Yeah, yes. Oh, gosh, yeah.
So this was not that, but I only finished it because I wanted to finish it, not because it was pulling me along.
Right. One of the things that Barbara Kingsolver has said is that she hopes that that first person narrator will reassure readers that he is going to survive. He's telling his own story, so he hasn't died. But boy, he does about everything else except die. So yeah, I hear your reaction. It was hard to get through a lot of those parts. Yeah. Yes.
You touched briefly on the character's inner qualities, and that David Copperfield is a very sympathetic, warm-hearted, good person. Did you feel in this novel that there was a fundamental decency to the character at any point? And if so, what would you point to show that?
What a fascinating question. I would love to hear others' perspectives on this. Is Demon fundamentally a decent character, and what would we point to? I mean, I think there are lots of examples of his decency. I think the overwhelming number of things that happen to him are what becomes so weighty and difficult as you're reading the book. What do you all think? Decent character, Demon? Yeah, everyone's saying yeah. So what are some examples that you saw of his decency?
Friendship with Maggot.
His friendship with Maggot. He's very good to Maggot, and he's very good to the people around him. He's very kind, very loyal. Other examples of Demon's goodness.
Rescuing the girlfriend that he had early on.
Yes, rescuing Emmy. It's a similar, again, a parallel plot to David Copperfield. Yes, he goes and rescues Emmy. Absolutely. And he cares for Dory, even though it's a mess. That whole situation is a mess, but he never leaves her. He's quite loyal. So I think his kindness and loyalty make him a good person, but he is forced to do some pretty wretched things as well because of his addiction. Yeah. Other comments, those who read the book, other things that you would like to say about why you loved this book if you loved it? Yes. Yeah.
I'm just curious, is the kite riding was one of my favorite parts, Mr. Dick?
Yes.
Is there a corollary to in Dave Copperfield, just the act of riding the kite or some kind of?
Yeah, there is a kite. So Mr. Dick is a character. There's a Dick character in both of these books, and now I get confused about which one is called which. But Dick, I think in David Copperfield is a sort of friend of Betsy's. And yeah, he has a whole other aspect though in David Copperfield where he's also writing these histories. He's not a well person and he's writing all these histories, and he does have a kite, but I don't remember if he writes on it. The words though that they write on in Demon Copperhead are taken from the Dickens novel. Yeah. Yep. Yes.
My husband is sick. I'm just wearing this for safety. I have one small comment to add to her biography. My husband and I were doing a cycling tour in Kentucky, and we stopped out in this beautiful rolling countryside at a little store and restaurant. And as we're waiting for our sandwich, we're wandering around, and I realized that every single book in this little store was a Kingsall. And I said, well, that seems a little weird. So sure enough, she owns this little store. And farmers could bring their produce in, and, you know, she employs people in the area. So again, she supports her community.
Yes, absolutely. She has wonderful things to say too about nicknames and why people give each other these nicknames as they do in Demon Copperhead. And she says it's, part of way that we know that we're, that we're part of this community, and it's just, people are always getting these nicknames, which I thought was great. Yes, Beth.
I listened to the book.
Oh, interesting.
and
I've heard the reader is great.
The reader is great, and the Appalachian accent,
Mhm.
it sucks you in, and you're rooting for Damon,
Mhm,
even
mhm.
though all these horrible things keep happening. But I think it makes you more immersed in the story. That's a hard place to be immersed.
Right.
But
So there's a third parallel universe then where I need to, I need to listen to it on tape and not, or on audio and not have read it. Yeah, I agree. I've heard that from other people who read it and just could not stop, or who listened to it and couldn't stop listening to it. It was so pulling. Yeah. Yeah, great. Yes, hi.
I was thinking about, this is social fiction you were telling us, and that King Songbird has been sort of criticized for being sort of didactic. Is there a way that you can think of that she could have written it that would be less so, that would still be social fiction? Because I mean, basically many novels have social goals in the end. Even if you're starting with a character, you have an idea that something's unfair and you kind of present that. So is there some kind of tweak you can think of that could have been done to this book to make it less so?
Yeah, I think there are certain passages where she leans into that didacticism more than others. And in fairness, she does give a lot of those lectures actually to his teachers, and he's relaying what his teachers have said about coal mining. And that is a great trick, actually, right? So Demon's not saying these things. The teachers are teaching the class about the history. So that's a way in which I think she avoids being too didactic. Kind of. She's still kind of preaching to us, though. I'll give you one really specific example that some of the reviews actually pointed out. You might remember that at one point, in addition to hillbilly and these other kind of denigrating terms, she uses the word, or Demon uses the word, deplorable. And for me, that pulled me right out, because I thought, yes, that's a word that we have used for years, but we all know that reference, basket of deplorables, and what a dividing point that was for rural Americans, I think. And it stuck out because this is the 1990s. I'm like, wait, no, this hasn't happened. Yes, the word deplorable is out there, but to put it in there seemed to me such a jab that I was taken out of it. And that's where I felt a little bit of that, like I would have, and she went back and forth with the editor, wanted to keep it, they were going to take it out, they were going to keep it, they were going to take it out. And I think she prevailed. She felt it was important to point out to the audience, no, this is what I'm talking about. You all say deplorable and you're reading about this character and caring about him, but you would call him deplorable if you met him in the street. So she really wanted that deplorable in there, but see, that's where I would argue artistically, that was a bit of a false note for me. Did any of the rest of you notice that when deplorable was used? I don't know, Beth, if when you were hearing it, that came out, but deplorable, it stuck out for me because of that reference, that Hillary Clinton reference. Yeah.
I think that went, I did not think that.
You may not have, yeah.
Say a little more about what that referred to for you, the deplorable.
So Hillary Clinton, in that fateful election, referred to Trump's basket of deplorables.
Oh,
Yeah. Yep. Probably a misstep on her part. Any other comments? Yes,
second question.
of course.
I wanted you to comment on the language because
Mm,
I read a review that said one of the most remarkable things about the book is that it illustrated for us, most of us have never experienced the seamy side of life. And probably most in this room have not directly experienced living in that world. Do you think that she overdid it with the language? Especially Demon's constant, well, I don't want to use the words, but you know what they are. Did she go over the top of it, do you think? Or do
with
you-
profanity, you mean, with the profanity? Or with the profanity, with the F words, yes. And I did say earlier, I think that she pulled lots of those out. I think there were like, I can't remember what she said in an interview, 217 F words or something, and she went in and pulled a bunch out. But the language, I thought the voice, and maybe I'm using voice and language interchangeably, I thought was beautiful and convincing. Are you objecting to the profanity or just asking
No, I'm
about?
just wondering, I know what she was trying to do,
Mhm,
which was give a very realistic picture of that world.
mhm.
I'm just wondering if perhaps it was a little over the top sometimes.
Right. If you could hear, she's asking about whether the language was a little over the top and demon. I think in some ways, for me, where it got to be over the top, where there were certain passages where I thought, who is actually speaking here? I mean, it's so lyrical and perfect. And not to say that I'm not making that comment that Demon couldn't possibly have said that, but he's like 15. How is he coming up with all of these? That's where it seemed to me to be a little, I still loved it, but it seemed a little false at that point. And there are specific passages we could look at that, really feel like you're pushing that a little bit too far. On the other hand, to me, what was so distinctive there is she's picking up all of this kind of, I don't want to say dialect, but almost dialect. I mean, she's really representing how this person speaks and how this region speaks. And when you, again, read Kingsolver interviews, she talks about how she really wanted to represent that speech and this kind of colorful way of speaking, like the nicknames and like these colorful turns of phrase. So overall, I thought the balance was good, but I agree if this is what you think, I do agree that in some places, the language got a little out of control either. The profanity didn't bother me so much, but certainly some of that overly poetic and lyrical, those moments where I thought, is this really someone who's 20 years old? It seemed too advanced in a way. It seemed like the author speaking, yeah. Thank you all. Any last questions or comments? Well, enjoy the beautiful day. Thanks again for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you.